Ever wonder what it's like to plant millions of trees in just a few months? Let me show you. My name is Felix Finkbeiner. I'm the founder of Plant for the Planet, and we're doing our best to help conserve and restore the forests of the Yucatán Peninsula. We're focusing on this area because it's one of the world's biodiversity hotspots. Biodiversity hotspots are areas that are biologically rich but also threatened. In fact, semi-deciduous tropical dry forests, like the one here, are some of the most threatened ecosystems in the world. And in the last 2 decades alone, we've lost 8% of all the forests in the state. This year, we'll be planting 2.5 million trees in 2 locations. In Las Américas 7, we're restoring a site that was at one point destroyed for cattle pasture. We'll be planting 2.1 million trees here. And over in Bacalar, about 2 hours from here, we are planting after a forest fire in 2019. We'll be planting another 400,000 trees there to bring back lost tree species. But let me show you how this restoration process works using Las Américas 7 as an example. Step 1 of the process is analyzing the site. By taking soil samples, we can create a soil map. And it turns out that our soil here is very high in clay and in rock, which makes restoration quite tough, but not impossible.
Half of it is one soil type called the leptosol, which is typically quite rocky and has relatively thin organic material on top. And the other part is an area of actually soil type called the vertisol, which is what I did my whole PhD on. So it's exciting to be working with this. So essentially what we're doing in this planting process is trying to pick the right species to plant in the right places.
NASA satellite imagery of this site of the past few decades allow us to confirm our predictions of how likely certain areas are to flood. And for particularly wet regions, we pick species mixes that are especially flood tolerant.
The vertisol soil type is actually one that has some seasonal flooding. So making sure that we pick the right tree species that can actually handle and tolerate that flooding is really important.
When restoring a forest, we want to make sure it's as similar as possible to what the forest was like before it was first cut down. So we want to know which species used to grow here so we can plant them. But since this forest was cut down decades ago, it's no longer possible to find out what used to grow here. So instead, we look for a so-called reference forest. That's a nearby forest with similar conditions. So we can analyze it instead and use it as a model for our forest.
Normalmente se identifica todo dentro de un cuadrante de 25 por 25 metros y hemos logrado muestrear actualmente 10 cuadrantes, dentro de los cuales hemos podido identificar alrededor de 30 especies diferentes.
Based on that information, we know which species we want to plant. For some of these species, it's quite easy to acquire seeds. But for other species that are very rarely ever planted, it's impossible. So you have to collect those seeds ourselves. I'm sure you can imagine how much work it requires to collect hundreds of thousands of seeds.
Hola, soy Marcos Escobar y soy el coordinador del programa de recolecta de semillas en Plant for the Planet en México. En 6 meses hemos recolectado aproximadamente 850,000 semillas pertenecientes a 16 especies de árboles silvestres que crecen en los alrededores de Constitución. Estas especies ocupan las primeras etapas de la sucesión ecológica, por lo que están adaptadas a germinar, crecer y prosperar en ambientes altamente degradados.
After collection, seeds need to be extracted from the fruits by our seed processing team. How exactly that works differs from species to species. This year, we're planting almost 30 different species because we want a forest full of life, in which hopefully soon box turtles will crawl again and jaguars will hunt again. Actually, 3 of our colleagues have seen jaguars in one of the sites we worked on in the past. We're here in our partner nursery where we're growing around 3 million seedlings this year. And the boss here is the engineer Carlos Luna. Carlos, ¿cuál es el desafío más grande de este año?
El desafío más grande para la producción de planta en 2021 ha sido el tener nuevas especies en producción, de tal manera que estamos experimentando en el proceso de germinación, manejo, crecimiento de plantas, así como lograr obtener una planta de buena calidad para las reforestaciones de 2021.
It takes about 3 to 6 months for these little seedlings to be big enough to be planted, depending on the species. Now, we cannot plant all year long because from around January to June, we experience an extended dry season. We don't spend that time twiddling our thumbs though. We spend it preparing for the planting season. That's because our trees compete with fast-growing grasses for sunlight and water. And to give them a better chance of survival, we use machetes to clear away that grass. Of course, in that process, we're very careful to protect any naturally regrowing trees. We want those to thrive as well. Starting in June, my colleague Dino studies the daily rain data very closely. Because as soon as we've had 5 consecutive days with more than a certain amount of rain, we know that the rainy season has begun, and that's our cue to start planting. The planting season is of course the most exciting and most stressful part of the year. For our forester colleagues, it means that each one of them plants up to 300 trees a day. And our restoration coordinators manage all of this with very precise plans of which species mixes are planted in which parts of the site.
Hola, buen día. Mi nombre es Marco Antonio Domínguez. Soy coordinador de las actividades de restauración en Plan for the Planet México. Actualmente estoy coordinando las actividades de restauración en Américas 7. Contamos con un personal alrededor de 100 personas. Es algo complejo el manejo de tantas personas, pero a la vez es un reto que vale la pena tomar.
While our restoration teams are planting, members of our monitoring team are recording the planted trees using our Tree Mapper app. All of that data is then immediately uploaded to our website so everyone can see exactly when we planted where. Tree Mapper also automatically informs our donors where their specific trees were planted. All of this technology is developed in-house by our Plant for the Planet software team and is open source and free to use for everyone. If you want to know more about how it all works, check out this video. Our monitoring team also flies drones above our sites to create high-resolution maps of these sites before and after planting so we can monitor how they change over time. And the most important part of our monitoring work are our permanent plots. These are sites that we return to again and again to measure and remeasure the trees we planted and the recruits to see how they're developing over time. And our monitoring plots are also paired with control plots so we can measure the exact impact of our work in the long run. All in all, we have about 150 people working with us this year, of which about a third work seasonally. That includes over 100 reforesters, 8 field crew leaders, 13 nursery technicians, 9 ecologists and forestry engineers, 4 data collectors, 6 cooks, 2 mechanics, and more. About 41% of our total costs are spent on salaries and social security for our core team. The next 23% are nursery costs. That includes the salary for the nursery staff as well. The next 20% are spent on food and housing for our team, and another 13% are spent on transport and energy. And the final 3% are our administrative costs. We're incredibly grateful for every single donor that makes it possible for us to do this work. We're now in our 7th year working here on the Yucatán Peninsula, and it's of course not always been smooth sailing. A lot has gone wrong in that time, and we made many mistakes. But we learn from every single one of them, and we're getting better with every tree we plant. And for the trees we planted this year, this is only the beginning of the process. Restoration is a long-term process. But from now on, after planting, nature is in the driver's seat.